Chapter 16. The Moon Dogs. Cyrus. Part 2. I looked out behind him then, finding the source of the music and more. Out in front of me stretched a whole compound built in and around the base of an enormous hill, stretching up 4 or 5 levels, all emanating different echoes of light and music that told me that they were all connected somehow. It was a blend of tunnels dug into the hillside and structure constructed on top of it, out of enormous trees still growing and ancient stone boulders that no team of men could conceivably have moved. There were dozens of windows, if you could call them that. There was no glass, just open-air balconies, leading to rooms that were dark and light, loud and quiet, some at the top small enough that only 2 people could stand side by side, and others, like the enormous great room from which the greatest source of the music and light and voices came, that seemed like they could hold hundreds. There were comings and goings as people moved in and out of the tunnels, especially leading to that big second-floor great room at the very center. More comings than goings, honestly, as friendly voices of recognition and cries of celebration added to the din. Clustered against the enormous hillside structure, there were several smaller buildings that all buzzed with activities. My eyes instantly twitched to the brightest sources of light. A clutch of fires off to the right side, which hosted upon them massive boar on even more massive spits, all punched through with stakes the size of small trees dripping with a thick maroon mixture. At their head was a slender woman with a large brown braid, wearing only pants and her massive pelt. She was directing traffic as a crew of younger men slowly rotated the first of the boars, sending a scent wave of fatty, fresh meat soaked with sharp, tart flavors. Then they left it to settle and moved on to the second, and then on to the third. Everyone seemed to be built in the same way as Tristan, sleek and powerful. Also, and it didn't seem like anyone really cared or noticed this, there were wolves, lots of them, everywhere. None were so large as the great wolf that had brought me here, but they were still massive animals. Yet they wandered around the people here like they had as much right to be at the party as their 2-legged compatriots. From where I could see, they laid under tables, devoured meats from thick bowls that were laid on the ground. They bared teeth and nearly got in fights. They quested quizzically towards the opposite sex, and all seemingly were oblivious to the fact that probably hundreds of their kin had been slaughtered to clothe the humans that they now spent time with. More people had than did not have versions of the massive pelts that Tristan wore on his shoulders, each complete with the totally preserved wolf head, which hung to the back, balanced on the shoulder, or perched atop the head, and none of the wolves seemed to mind. Another smack from Tristan came, and I stumbled forward, catching myself only to receive another shove, and then a second, to the point where I caught on and started walking forward myself.
"There's a good boy,"
Tristan said with a chuckle, and then continued to speak.
"Now, you're with me, so I don't imagine there's going to be any trouble, but you can never tell with these parties. Not sure how some of the wolves in there have been drinking."
"You get the wolves drunk?" I asked.
"It is a party, kid," Tristan said.
"Oh," I said. Of course, if only I'd known.
"Yeah, just keep close to me, you'll be fine, Valgardian," he said. "Won't be long before the big man comes back."
"Who's the big man?" I asked. Tristan laughed.
"Oh, you'll know him,"
Tristan said, and that was that. We were getting awfully close to the front door now, and as we passed the first of the cook fires, I could sense the gazes of both humans and wolves. I said, "Can I just wait outside?"
"Well, wouldn't want a stray Grady to come by and eat you, do I?"
He chuckled, and even with my heels digging into the ground, we passed into the overflow from the compound. Along the tables scattered out on the grass, wolves lounged on the floor, a pair of women were arm wrestling, a man and another woman were chugging enormous beers as fast as they could, and a couple in heated conversation looked at each other with a combination of longing and rage like they couldn't decide whether to start a fight or go at it right on the table. Ahead of us, the tunnel narrowed first before twisting upwards into a heavy stone stairway, where the thick beats and pounding music grew louder. At the edge, sort of the entrance to the whole place, wreathed in smoke from a long saber-tusk pipe, there was a thick man with a 4-braided beard down his chest, nodding to each man, woman, and wolf as they passed and entered. He caught a glance of us as we approached, nodding to Tristan as I was shuffled through the grass and dirt, dodging tables. There were more glances from groups lighting fleets of similar pipes, and a few of what looked like a dozen people taking a break, setting up an elaborate drinking game to sniff the air as Tristan brought me past. I guess that he wasn't the only one who could smell something different about me. Thinking a little longer, I could definitely smell something different about them, at least from the Edrins I'd met, but that was all that I could tell. Besides, I had no idea what I smelled like.
Last time I played it, I heard that game was called Skipjack, not Stare at Tristan Business Jack.
Tristan tossed to the onlookers. Few of them looked back to the game. More took stolen looks at me before deciding that their drinks were more interesting. And then at last we moved from dirt onto the stone of the entryway.
Yep, putting this one in the back for the big man,
Tristan mentioned to the man with the 4-tailed beard, who nodded as he exhaled a massive cloud of aromatic smoke that made my head swim. He looked over me, then back over to Tristan.
Interesting prey,
the man said. I could see his nostrils flare, but he wasn't so obvious as Tristan had been about inspecting me.
This who I've been hearing the mutters about? Yeah, quite the mysterious game, Doran,
Tristan said, swatting the other man.
But he ain't for eating. We got the Gorbonet boar for that coming in a few.
Eating me had been up for consideration? Doran nodded, patting his belly.
Snuck a bit of the crust a little while ago, he said. It'll be good.
Well, what'd Air make you do for that? Tristan said, punching Doran knowingly in the chest, but Doran just shook his head and waved the two of us on. As we ascended the stairs, we descended into half-light, and I was suddenly dizzy in the darkness as the smell of booze and sweat and meats filled the air, layered under the sweet smoke and the acrid smoke and the music that swelled as we went further into the den. There were primarily tables and chairs here, but any organization had been thrown out the window long before we'd arrived. Some were scattered to the side, pushed together, broken, or currently on their sides being rolled into a circle on one side of the room. At the far end, the band was playing in a fervor, a quartet split among 2 men at war with thick drums of all sizes and compositions, and a man and woman each with long hair sending swelling tones through the room through a pair of massive carved horns. All along between there were men and women and wolves, all at varying stages of drunk and many awfully physically involved with one another, whether fighting or feeling. Tristan's swatting hand led me through the rowdy crowd towards the back, where there was a long bar along the wall. Behind it was a woman who was indistinguishable from the head chef except for the addition of a form-fitting shirt like Tristan wore, and she moved behind the bar carrying 2 sloshing barrels, one on her shoulder and the other hanging down by her side. At the sight of Tristan, she placed the barrels and flagged the man down, beckoning with a finger. "He's tastier than I thought he'd look," she said, as Tristan pushed me up to the bar. I'd really preferred not to be constantly referred to by culinary value. If we could all just... Oh, yeah, I didn't think so.
Yeah, you always had taste for some strange, Tristan said. How you doing, Ava?
"Just doing," Ava said, pulling Tristan over for a kiss on both cheeks over the bar. "Heard about a little scuffle going on out on the range, but nothing crazy."
"Yeah, any other night I might worry about it," Tristan said. "Somehow this evening I ain't."
"Well, it ain't every night that the big man's about," Ava said.
"And the dame,"
Tristan said, nodding behind her. Past them, past the bar, there were tunnels that led further upstairs, with a pair of men chatting over drinks as they leaned back on either side. They were arranged casually, and there were even people nearby them, but there was no one further down the hallway. And though I couldn't be sure, it looked like they were guarding something. "Indeedy," Ava said, turning back to me but talking to Tristan. "So, what you doing with this one in the meantime? You just gonna let him loose on the bar?" She reached out and popped my jacket up, a wry smile on her face as I jumped in response. "Oh, nah, I'll just toss him in back on one of the hen dens," Tristan said. "Ain't no one using them before late anyway." "Well," Ava said, "last I saw, Palin was back there with a nice-looking little femme. Velen, maybe?" "Shit, he's already making his move?" Tristan asked. "Son's been gone for what, an hour?" "Well, I've never been one to hesitate when the need struck," Ava said with a shrug. "Yeah, you right," Tristan said. "But you know what? I'm gonna fuck with him anyway. Boyo, you're coming with me." Ava waved as Tristan suddenly dragged me away, steering us towards another tunnel on the other side of the great room, where a dingy smell mixed with heavier smoke. Following Tristan, we stepped into the tunnel, where 1,000 type sustains marked the walls. Music was a little quieter here, with both the hallway and rooms blocked off by heavy doors. The first we passed was cracked ajar, but I could see into the second, which seemed little more than a storage closet for furniture. There were no windows in the otherwise cell-like room, which had a few cushions, chairs, and a thick old mattress with no frame in the back of the room. And all along there were the same burn marks and smoke smells, spilled bottles and stray food, and empty pipes and other glassware left crusted with residues and still half filled with water and other liquids. It was a cavalcade of chemical and physical smells that I recognized only half of. Maybe less than that. The next room down the hallway had what looked like the best working door handle in the whole place, a shiny new latch that looked like it was recently replaced. From behind it, slowly crescendoing over the sound of the music, I could hear what I could only assume were Palin and the rumored Velen having a very good time. "Oh shit, bastard's doing it," Tristan chuckled, putting his ear up to the room and hearing what I had. He laughed again as he tried the door, noticing that it was locked. He frowned then, but pulled the key from a back pocket, sticking it in the lock and nodding as the gears clicked. Then he turned to me. "You ever had a threesome, boy?" he asked, far more casually than a question of its magnitude required. "Well, anyway, hope you're a quick learner," he said. And in a moment that seemed to sort of happen all at once, Tristan kicked the door in, stepping into the room at the same time as he snatched me by the back of the shirt and underhand tossed me into the half-lit room towards the ongoing negotiations, where I began to process what he'd said about 6 realizations too late. Velen and Palin were very slow to react, seemingly drunk and otherwise occupied, of course, and out of a tumbling eye I barely caught a glimpse of Velen, eyes opening and turning in confusion before I somersaulted over, impacted her with enough force to send us both off the mattress and into the crevice between the bed and the wall. To Palin, a moment of sudden passion ran to confusion as he whipped left to see Tristan laughing, whipped right to see me sprawled on my back like a turtle, and somewhere out of sight his now nearly invisible and equally trapped lover. Oh, God, that is far more of that man than I wanted to see right. And then Palin took a swing at me, aiming for my gut but hitting the wall because Velen kicked out at the exact same time, bouncing me up into the air with, again, surprising strength. I kept going up, and Palin missed my face a second time as I rose, with him punching the wall and now nearly falling into the crevice himself. I was on my way down when I began to hear Tristan laughing even harder, and then I landed on Palin, pushing him back down, smushing him back on top of Velen. We would have thought that was going to make everything back okay, but with a roar he stood up to shake me, pulling me and Velen, who had grabbed onto him, both up with, again, more astounding strength. These people were very strong. I think he was planning to get me in a more convenient position for a beating, but I was never sure because the extra weight from Velen sent us all tumbling, and the combination of the old busted mattress and their collective drunkenness, and the old crusty sheets, and my anything but elegant flopping around as I tried to right myself turned what had been 3 presumably respectable people into weasels in a whirlpool. I vaguely remember apologizing profusely as Velen screamed at both him and me, punches and kicks and scratches and claws flowing in every direction, while Tristan roared laughing in the background. He started to wheeze just as Palin made contact with a particularly poorly aimed haymaker that missed me and went right to Velen's jaw, sending her flopping nearly unconscious onto my chest and knocking both of us onto the floor. There was a slight break in the action then, as Palin pulled back, appalled by his actions, and as Velen mumbled into the ground and started to woozily stand back up. My spinning head settled. Holy tits and a half! Blatantly unprepared for the appearance of a mostly nude woman on my chest, I screamed in shock. That made her scream and knee me in the groin. I crumpled like a wet sock, bidding goodbye to the rest of my pride as she fell back onto the ground, scrambling towards her feet. I was wheezing then, and I could hear Palin start to apologize just as Velen stood up, sending a far better aimed haymaker into Palin's jaw, who slumped face first on the ground, apology coming out in gibberish as he went unconscious, legs jelly and hands behind him, totally naked. And then things fell silent except for the sound of heavy breathing, and Tristan wheezing on the floor, with face so red I would have wondered if he was okay if I wasn't also wheezing in life-altering pain on the ground. With bleeding nose, Velen looked to me, then to Palin, then to Tristan, who was in the process of dragging himself over to a chair to sit up. "You think this is funny?" she demanded. Tristan was laughing too hard to respond, but got out a nod just fine. Velen went off in a huff, strategically reassembling her clothes, walking over to grab her pelt, and then not even bothering to don a shirt before she went for the door. As she walked past Tristan, who had made it to the chair and was trying to breathe, she stopped and then kicked the ever-living stuffing out of him, leaving him to oof and fall back, coughing through the chuckles. Screaming out in frustration, she slammed the door shut, leaving the 3 of us scattered across the room with nothing but the sound of Tristan still giggling, wheezing, and absolutely gasping in laughter in the dark. It was a few minutes before Tristan stumbled back to his feet, walking over to a swearing and pissed-off Palin, who was still naked and muttering violent words and threats with every break in the aftermath of vomiting.
"Oh, save it for later," Tristan said, scooping up the younger man, and his clothes.
Palin was almost as tall as Tristan, but the difference in size and strength was clear, and with frustrated words still bubbling through him at the same time as his vomit, he was tossed out into the hallway, where he quickly attempted to grab his own pelt and clothes and storm away. Tristan watched him go, continuing to laugh intermittently as he turned to me, still curled up in life-altering pain on the floor.
"You know, boy," he said, "when they say to bust a nut, they don't mean it literally."
I rolled over a bit, looking up at him before turning back to the floor to continue nursing my injuries.
You'll both get over it," he said,
walking towards the door, still laughing his tail off.
Boy, I'm locking you in, so just hold tight until the big man's here. Don't let anyone else in for funny business, you got it?"
I rolled over in time to see him slam the door shut, lock clicking behind him.
Just throw some furniture in front of it,"
I heard him yell, and then he was gone,